Hi guys, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic, fantastic. Just getting started here. Nice to have you on board. I'm Phil Nunn. I should let you know this 2-hour webinar is being recorded, so it can be played later in next week in Mental Health Week as well. Please, while I'm talking to you, if you can just keep your microphones muted, that'd be great. Every so often I'll stop and ask if there's any questions or observations. If you've got a really burning question, send it through the chat and I'll try and respond to that. Okay. Alrighty. So you guys who I can see on the screen, you're all Anglicare, are you? Down in Tassie? Yeah?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. What's the weather like down there?
Not too bad today.
All right. Nice and sunny in New South Wales, yeah. Okay, I'm going to kick off. Other people will join as we go. I am showing you a PowerPoint and some videos and things like that too. If you can't see something, just holler out, okay? So I'm just starting with a PowerPoint here. Where's it gone? Goodness me. Can you see a PowerPoint slide saying risky business? What do you tell me? Can somebody see the PowerPoint slide? Yeah, oh yeah, thumbs up. There we go, fantastic. Okay, so I'm a psychologist in private practice. I've worked with adolescents for, goodness me, about 25 years now. And I was asked by Carleen to talk about dealing with high-risk situations with young people. So we're really looking at communication skills and strategies for working with young people with high-risk behaviours. So I'll be talking about things like self-harm and suicidal thoughts, as well as other mental health conditions, and sharing with you some of my thoughts and ideas on how we can best support these people. So we're looking at understanding adolescence, what that's all about, responding to people at risk of harm, different mental health issues, and managing really concerning situations, crisis situations. In the last part of today, I'll be talking about professionalism, boundaries, and the importance of worker self-care. Meaning how to look after yourself and stay sane when you're working with young people who might have challenging behaviours. Okay, so now you might have seen this before, but have a look at this quote here. It's quite a famous quote and it's from quite a while ago. Youth today love luxury. They have bad manners, contempt for authority, no respect for older people, talk nonsense when they should be working. Young people do not stand up any longer when adults enter the room. They contradict their parents. They talk too much. They guzzle their food, lay their legs on the table, and tyrannise their elders. Would anybody like to take a guess at when this was written? If you don't know, send your guess through the chat line. Approximately when do you think this quote was written? Somebody is very smart. Aristotle. Yeah, you're pretty close. It was actually Socrates, but you know, they're both from Greece and a long time ago, so that's good. Yeah, so this is a quote from Socrates, 500 BC. Quite often people think that it was 100 years ago or even 50 years ago, that type of thing. The reason I'm showing you this quote is because it seems that throughout human history, young people have had behaviours which are often seen as challenging or problematic to adults and society. It seems that young people throughout history have always, challenged things, challenged the status quo as well. So that's a quote from Socrates, 500 BC. Here's another couple of quotes. Here is one from Aristotle. Youth are heated by nature as drunken men by wine. That's an interesting one. And particularly like this one. I would that there were no age between 10 and 23, for there is nothing in between but getting wenches with child, wronging the ancient tree, stealing and fighting. That's from William Shakespeare. So why am I showing you these quotes? Well, because what I'm really interested in as a psychologist who works with adolescents is at what level is what we see here normal behaviour. So is it normal for young people to actually push the boundaries, challenge what's going on? And at what point does that behaviour, depending on the context and where you are in history and what cultural society you're in, at what point does that behaviour become pathology? In other words, a label that is given to that person, because they're seen as doing something wrong or being difficult in some way. And I'm sure the young people you work with, they attract a whole bunch of different labels. So one way to look at it is a historic view of young people is that perhaps society sees them as causing problems. If they don't cause problems in society, they're labelled as having problems. And sadly, sometimes young people are told that they are problems. So young people who I've worked with who are homeless, often they're told that they are the problem. They can't stay with the family because they're causing problems. If that's not the case, they have problems. They have ADHD, or they have Asperger's, or, they're on the autism spectrum, or they have a bad attitude, or they cause different problems in society. So one of my suggestions is that when you meet young people and you're talking to them, ask them, say, what labels have you got? Often it'll come up in conversation, but what labels have you got? And if somebody says, oh, I have Asperger's, or I have ADHD, or I have conduct disorder, or even if I have depression or something like that, say to that young person, what does that label mean to you? And so one of the things I'm suggesting here is that a really effective way to work with young people, particularly those with high-risk behaviours, is what I call naive inquiry. It's a bit of, excuse me, a bit of a wanky term, but what it means, naive inquiry means saying to a person, help me understand what it's like for you. And by doing that, we put the young person in the role of expert, and they know what it's like to be in their shoes, in their world. And they also know what it's like to have a label applied to them. And what you will find is some of the time that label is helpful, and it helps them get treatment or understand themselves better, or be supported if they have, say, a label of autism spectrum, where they can get extra support at school and things like that. But other times the label might be reducing of them in some way. And so I'd say be a little cynical about the labels, but inquire of young people. What does that label mean to you? Does it help you, or does it hold you back? All right. And just so you know, one of the labels I've got, and I think I've met some of you before, and I'm quite out and proud in talking about it. When I was growing up here in London in England, way back in the 1960s and 70s, I was labelled as having minimal brain dysfunction and having hyperkinetic disorder because I could not sit still. It wasn't until many years later that I got a proper label, which is ADHD. So back then, when I was labelled with minimal brain dysfunction, I felt there was something wrong with me. I thought I was crazy. That label didn't help me at all. But when years later, when I actually got the correct diagnosis of ADHD, I could go, it was a great relief. I could go, okay, that makes sense to me. That's why I find it hard to focus and concentrate. And like many people with that diagnosis, I find that I can take medication that really, really helps me a lot and gives me a better quality of life. So be a little cynical of the labels. So young people today, they are growing up in a very fast and an ever-changing world. So I want to talk a little bit about adolescence and what that really means. So for a lot of people, the idea of adolescence is the teenage years. And it does seem that what's happening nowadays, that the idea of adolescence is changing. And it's changing because we're seeing that adolescence is it's that transition between being a child and being an adult. So as a term, and this is from Wikipedia, adolescence is that transitional stage of physical and mental human development that occurs between childhood and adulthood. And that transition involves biological changes, mainly puberty, but there are social and psychological changes there. And so for a young person, there's a lot going on, a lot of change in those teenage years. However, the changes that are easiest to measure are the biological or physiological changes, such as growing taller and things like that, but also the changes that occur after puberty. So recently, by which I mean in the last couple of decades, puberty has started earlier, particularly for females. And for males, yeah, it's starting a little bit earlier. But what we find with males is that there's an extension of adolescence, if you like, the other end. So girls are starting puberty earlier, boys are starting puberty a little bit earlier, but males in particular are still developing into their early and mid-20s in many cases. And what's developing is this frontal lobe part of the brain that helps people process information. So can anybody tell me, and just stick it through the chat, what is the average age in Australia that a young woman will start her menstrual cycle, start her periods? What's an average age? Take a guess. So I can see Liam and Wendy. Yeah, okay, so we've got 12 from Liam and Wendy. We've got 11 from Manib, 12 from Steph Courtney, and everybody at Anglicare. Okay, you're all in the ballpark. This might be a bit of a shock to you. For boys, puberty still starts around 11 or 12. And interestingly, and in a bit of a strange, gross way, the way we measure puberty in boys is by that first, what's the correct clinical term? Nocturnal emission or wet dream. And if you think about it, it would not be very likely that a young male would perhaps come to the breakfast table and say to his family, hey, last night while I was sleeping, you know, I had this dream. That doesn't happen. The average age for young women to start their menstrual cycle, start their periods in Australia is 10.2 years. And there's a lot of studies on this, but 10.2 is the average age. Now, what's important to understand here is that for every 6 months, for every decade, the onset of puberty for girls comes down about 6 months. When I was growing up in England, it was about 13, 14. Now it's between 10 and 11. But there is a very interesting series of studies that look at why puberty in girls is earlier. And just so you know, it's not hormones in chicken. It's not the parabens and plastics in drink bottles that does it. But there are two interesting things that seem to cause early puberty in girls. One thing is health and nutrition. So we have seemingly better nutrition, less disease burden. So as human beings, we grow faster. And so we reach the benchmark of puberty earlier than ever before. The other one is obesity. And we find that young women who have a bit more body fat are more likely to start their periods early. And so there's some, if you like, cultural differences there. Young women I know of who come from a Polynesian background, you know, Samoan, Tongan background, that type of thing. Often they have a bit more body fat and they start their periods sometimes as early as 8 or 9, which is shocking. But the most interesting thing about this is girls who start their periods earlier, it seems that it's partly influenced by family structure. So if you are a young woman growing up in a family where you have your biological parents present, both your mum and dad present, all right, that actually, because your father is closer in the gene pool, he actually suppresses the hormones of puberty because he's close in the gene pool. So girls growing up with their biological father present are more likely to start their periods closer to 11 or 12. However, young women growing up in a family with a non-biologically related adult male, such as a stepdad, because he is outside of the gene pool in a biological sense, it's gross, but he's seen as a potential mate, and the presence of a non-biologically related adult male will trigger the hormones of puberty off in girls, where it will be closer to 9 when they start puberty. This might sound really weird and gross. If you want to look for the studies, go on Google or a search engine and type in stepdads early puberty in girls. Now, what this actually means is that young women in particular are becoming sexually mature, capable of reproducing earlier than ever before in history. And I think we'd all agree that, you know, a 9 or 10-year-old girl, although she's capable of reproducing, probably isn't emotionally equipped to handle you know, sex and all of that stuff that goes on. But I am reminded that Romeo and Juliet were seen to be 12 or 13 years of age in Shakespeare. So, you know, perhaps this idea's been around for a long time. So what this really means is that puberty is starting earlier, particularly for girls, but going later, particularly for males. And so if we take the idea that about half of teenage males are still developing the frontal lobes of their brain into their early or mid-20s, that actually means that about half of the males that you work with are, how can I put it, neurologically compromised, particularly in their ability to assess risk and things like that. So perhaps some of the high-risk behaviours that we see in males isn't just because they got a bad attitude and they're a bit crazy, but it's actually because neurologically they are not wired up sufficiently to actually properly assess risk and make decisions in their best interests. And you'd probably all have noticed that that girls, yes, they grow faster than boys. And at school, you know, the girls in their teenage years are often taller than the boys, and then the boys catch up a little bit later. So girls, if you like, are getting a bit of a head start. So with adolescence, it used to be that it was, you know, you had to be 18 before you could get married without your parents' consent. 18 to drink alcohol still is the case. Vote, you know, to sign a contract. And that's fine, and it's still like that in many states and countries. However, the reality of young people's behaviour is that a lot of them are having, if you like, adult behaviours which are starting way before it's legally and socially sanctioned. So the young people I work with, they are typically becoming sexually active around 15 years of age, males and females. And they are starting to experiment, if you like, with drugs and alcohol, often earlier than 15, 13, 14, that type of thing. So what that means is there's increased risk for young people in all sorts of ways, and we have to find ways to actually talk to them that help manage those risks. And one of the things that does not seem to work is wagging your finger at a young person saying, you shouldn't be doing that, that's wrong. And so just for a second, think about your own adolescence. You know, when you were growing up, did you do things that you didn't want your family to know about? Did you hang around with the wrong people, experiment with your sexuality or recreational drugs and stuff like that, at a time when your family and other people would have really frowned upon that? And what was it that that kept you safe and helped you not take really crazy risks that would do a lot of damage? So one of the first ideas I want to float to you is this: if you are talking to a young person about risky behaviours, sex, drugs, you know, stuff like that, including mental health issues like self-harm, suicidality, it's often not a good idea to get that young person, sit them down, look them in the eye or across a table or something, and ask them a lot of closed questions like, are you doing drugs? Are you self-injuring? Are you thinking about killing yourself? This type of stuff. And the reason why I say don't, you know, sit them down and interrogate them in that way is because they will lie to you. They will lie if they feel that you're invading their privacy and things like that. So what do? Well, what I find is most helpful, particularly in an initial conversation with a young person, is to say to them, okay, right, you you go to school, you live locally and stuff like that. In your group of friends, in your group of peers, do you know anybody who, for example, cuts or burns themselves, self-injures? Do you know anybody who's heavily into alcohol or other drugs? Do you know anybody who has, for example, been sexually assaulted when they're intoxicated? And so, what I'm suggesting is initially ask about the group, because that way the young person can have the opportunity to talk about the risks and what they see in their world, but they're not sort of forced to dob themselves in. I find that when I do that, we can talk about what they see, and quite often, because I'm a professional counsellor, I am saying at the beginning of a counselling session, okay, anything we talk about is confidential, unless there's a serious risk of harm to somebody. For example, harm to self, like suicidal thoughts or serious self-injury, harm to other, like murder or homicide, and an under 16-year-old being harmed. Now, that's obviously mandatory reporting, and you guys probably do all of this. But if you say that to a young person, they are quite sometimes quite reluctant to share what's going on for them if it's high risk, because they're scared that you're going to dob them in or whatever. So the initial idea of asking about the group helps open it up. And the other thing I do, which is perhaps a little bit naughty, is if I think a young person is wanting to talk about these high risk behaviours, and I get a sense that there's something there, but they're scared to tell me because of confidentiality, I will float the idea that they can tell me about friends who have risky situations. And it's not uncommon for a young person to go, oh, okay, right, I've got this friend, and my friend has been, having a tough time lately, and my friend has been injuring themselves, or my friend is sometimes feeling like they want to commit suicide. Now, when that happens, depending on the young person, quite often they know that you know that it's not a friend, and you can have the conversation about how do we help your friend, but usually within a few minutes the young person will calm down a little bit and say, okay, it's not my friend, it's me, which is fine. And at that point you might want to say, okay, then all right, well, we can talk about how we help you and help your friend if you still want to talk about your friend. But if I believe, or you as the young person believe, that there's a serious risk of harm, and here's what I say, we will figure out what we need to do to keep everybody safe. And in nearly 25 years of counselling with young people, I've never, ever had a problem with that. So using the we word, what do we need to do to keep everybody safe, is a great way to work with a young person to help them feel okay, and to kind of calm them and steer them in the direction of taking a problem-solving approach to how do we keep people safe, and that can be very, very helpful. Okay, so some of the mental health issues for teens, depression, anxiety, eating disorders, body image disorders, and perhaps in later teens, occasionally psychotic episodes. Psychotic episodes can be precipitated by drug use, but they could also be mental health issues like depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, which can cause the person, if you like, to be out of touch with reality. Kind of rare, but it does occur. And mental health issues, mental health problems, most of them actually begin in the teenage years. And I'm of the belief that a lot of that is because young people inherit a predisposition, say, to depression or anxiety, and the pressures that they're under in the teenage years cause them to cause that mental health issue to come out then. And so we've got to find ways of talking about that. Use of alcohol or drugs, often as self-medication, is not uncommon. And often with that, we have to go very carefully and talk to young people about it. Again, starting talking about the group, what sort of drugs do your or alcohol do your friends use? How much do you use? And carefully try to give young people information that essentially will reduce the risk of harm without, shutting them out, because if you say to a young person, right, using drugs is illegal or it's bad or damage your brain or something like that, they might stop talking about it and say that they don't do it. So you need to gently move into exploring the risk there. So dangerous or risky behaviours would include things like binge drinking, use of illegal drugs, and more recently, part of the problem is that we have a lot of synthetic substances. And so, over the internet, particularly on the dark web, you can buy virtually any type of a drug that you want to get your hands on. And that is not very safe. It's really, really scary because you don't know what you're getting. So we need to talk about that. Other risky behaviour might be having unsafe sex or doing criminal activity like shoplifting, vandalism or violence. Or if they're a little bit older, perhaps driving dangerously, or even getting in a car with somebody else who's at risk through intoxication or whatever. And thoughts of suicide or harming yourself or others. I live in northern beaches of Sydney, and I did a sort of random survey at Pittwater High School last year. And in year 11 and 12, 73% of young people reported that they had at times had thoughts of ending their life if things got worse. And 1 in 5, that's 20%, reported using a deliberate self-injury as a way to cope with emotions in the last year. Now, bear in mind, this was an anonymous survey, but those statistics are really, really frightening, that young people are struggling so much. And what we have to do is find ways that we can talk to those young people about this stuff that doesn't scare them away. And again, quite often I'm talking to young people about how would you help your friend if they were presenting, with some of those issues. There is a Netflix TV show which some of you have probably heard of, 13 Reasons Why. People know this show? Give me a thumbs up if you heard of this. Yeah. 13 Reasons Why. I'm often hearing from parents, teachers, adults generally, oh my God, young people should not be looking at this TV show, with the idea that it will somehow damage their mental health. I actually take a different view. I think saying to young people, don't watch 13 Reasons Why is going to make them watch it. But what I would say to young people is, do you know anybody who's watched that show? Have you watched that show? And have a discussion about it. And so I think, although it's pretty confronting, what the show does, and for those who don't know, it's about a young woman who suicides ends her life. And she subsequently sends cassette tapes to all the people who wronged her, so 13 Reasons Why. And these cassette tapes are sent to the people who abused her, treated her badly, didn't help her. Now, when I talk with young people about this, and I'm talking, young people as young as 11 or 12, they are very switched on. They know that, this stuff does happen. And my conversation with them is, okay, so what should she have done? What should she have done? And invariably they say she should have talked to somebody about how she was feeling. She shouldn't have let it get so bad that she ended up dead. And the other point I make, or which a young person pointed out to me, was that the character in 13 Reasons Why, she is dead. So she actually, the show is based on a revenge scenario, but she does not see the benefit of that revenge because she is actually dead. And that makes people often think about, well, okay, if my friend is having a tough time, maybe I want to encourage my friend to get some help before it gets too serious. So I think in that way, these confronting TV shows can be a good opportunity to discuss these topics with young people. And personally, I think it should be done in high school. There should be discussions in classes about this, obviously with parental permission. And one of the things that I feel very, very strongly about working with a lot of young people who are suicidal is there is a ridiculous, stupid idea that if we talk to young people about suicide or serious harm and stuff like that, it will somehow give them the idea. And that is absolute crap. It is not like that. And please tell me if you've ever, met a young person who suicide has been mentioned and they've gone, oh, I hadn't thought of that one. You either think that way or you don't. And I know this might be confronting for people, but I believe we talk about it. We talk about it in real language, and we try to engage young people so that we can keep them and keep their friends safe. Okay, so any questions, comments or observations about that? Feel free to heckle. Don't be shy, switch your mic on and ask me a question if you wish. You're a quiet bunch. Nobody? Okay. All right, so look, I'll talk a bit more about the adolescent brain. I'll show you a bit of a video. So the adolescent brain, it seems, is closed for construction. It seems that adolescent brains are a work in progress, and differences in adolescent brain function means that some adolescents, particularly males, have difficulty in the areas of self-control, so increased risk-taking, impulsive, sensation-seeking behaviours, short-sightedness, not thinking ahead, seeking immediate gratification, not considering consequences, and that they are also susceptible to influence. They are risk from peer pressure or perhaps, media, particularly social media and things like that, to behave in certain ways. So what that means, particularly if it's a young male, is we have to talk to them about that risk-taking behaviour and try and give them strategies not to harm themselves very much. It is important to understand that risk-taking is very normal for teenagers, and it actually has a very important function. Risk-taking is how you figure out your parameters, how you know what your limits are and things like that. And there is a lot of evidence that teenagers are in fact taking risks, social risks, risk with sexual behaviour, risk with drug and alcohol, as a way to figure out, what they're actually capable of. So the way to look at risks is a lot of it goes like this, where it's the psychosocial task of adolescence. So it's normal for an adolescent, in other words, somebody after puberty, to try and separate or individuate from the family. This is why 14-year-olds won't come to granny's birthday party. It's normal for adolescents to have experimentation and risk-taking, trying out new attitudes, values, beliefs, lifestyle choices, exploring their sexuality. And let's be very clear here. We know that 1 in 10 adults in Australia identifies as homosexual or same-sex attracted. So that means that you've got a class of 30 kids who are teenagers. Statistically, 3 of them are likely to be gay. And it's important to still recognise that there is still terrible discrimination against people, in spite of all the, openness in society. And so that young people, the 1 in 10 who might be gay or, GBLTQI questioning and so on, they need special attention and support because they are at greater risk of self-harm, depression, and even suicidality as well. And so the main point of adolescence is to try and form a unique and stable sense of identity. Who am I? Where am I going? What am I capable of? What do I want from my life? And you do that as an adolescent by trying out new things, by taking risks, by pushing the boundaries and so on. So risk-taking is not only normal, it's actually necessary. Young people need to take a little bit of a risk, hopefully, with not too much harm coming to them, so they can figure out how far they can take things. So with working with young people, some of the things that we want to be thinking about is engaging and connecting. So it's quite common if you work with young people and you're a youth worker or you're a case manager with young people, it's quite common that about half of young people you work with engage and connect with you pretty easily. But the other half, 5 out of 10, aren't quite ready yet. And you find yourself chasing them or trying to engage them, and they are reluctant or resistant. And so bearing that in mind, that means if you've got 10 clients, 5 of them, you're working with them, that's great. But the other 5, they're not ready to accept your support or whatever your service offers. So you basically have to wait and make sure that they know that you are there, that help is available when they want, but you accept that it's only when they're ready that they'll come and talk to you. And so the first part of working with young people is building rapport. Now, building rapport basically means, making a young person feel comfortable, and building a sense of trust there. If you've never seen any of her stuff, have a look at Brene Brown. Brene Brown is fantastic when it comes to rapport building, trust, and engagement and things like that. And she makes a very good point. She says, when people first connect with each other, they're trying to they're trying to build trust. But the point she makes is trust is built incrementally. So in other words, if you meet a young person and you talk to them and you say to them, okay, this conversation is confidential. If you maintain that confidentiality, it builds a little bit of trust. And so then if you make them a promise, you say to them, okay, I'll try and find out about that TAFE course for you. That builds a little bit more trust and it keeps building up. But the problem is if you build up, lots of trust in this sort of jelly bean jar of trust with a young person, if you breach that trust for some reason, such as breaking a promise or breaching their confidentiality, the trust goes back down to 0 again. So trust is built incrementally, and it's a very, very precious thing. So what that means is if you're trying to build rapport, if you are going to have to, tell a young person's parents or school about something, you're transparent about it. You say, I'm sorry I have to do this, but I need to inform the school that, that you're having a tough time or whatever. But let them know that you will do it, because if you go behind their back in any way, you've broken the trust, you've damaged the relationship, and it will be a long, long road to get back there. So once you've got a bit of rapport and you start to develop a supportive relationship with a young person, often as professionals and as counsellors and helpers, we're sucked into this idea that we're expected to give advice to young people. Now, this might sound strange, but I'm a psychologist and a counsellor. I don't give people advice, by which I mean prescriptive advice. I think you should do this. I don't do that, and I tell people that I don't do that, but I will make suggestions. But most of what I'm doing, particularly with young people, is exploring their issues and doing what I would call collaborative problem solving, trying to figure out what's going on for them, trying to help them articulate what this is, a problem or an issue, and then work together to actually figure out a way forward. And I used to think years ago that counselling was about providing solutions or fixing people or, giving them an answer. I no longer believe that, simply because the most powerful helping is when another person works with you to come to their own conclusion about what they need to do, and they have ownership of that way forward. So collaborative problem solving can lead to strategies that can help a person manage better. And ultimately, let's be honest about it, when you've supported a young person and they've got strategies to manage, you know it's a success when they do not come back, when they don't need you anymore, they ride off into the sunset and they have a wonderful life. And young people are notorious for, in my humble opinion, not saying thank you, and you really helped me and stuff like that. So what I'm doing a lot of the time at the end of any counselling session or even a conversation, I will say to a young person, can you tell me what is helpful or unhelpful about what we're doing here? And so by asking that question, what is helpful or unhelpful, you're soliciting feedback. But be warned, because if you give a young person permission to give you feedback like that, they will tell you, and it might not be what you want to hear, but don't take it personally. See it as a way to improve your communication and your counselling skills. Can you tell me what's helpful or unhelpful? Or if they've seen another counsellor or something like that, can you tell me what that counsellor did that was helpful or unhelpful? And that's a good way to find out what a young person needs. So, relationships. It really is about relationships with young people. Those young people who feel connected to something, have opportunities to participate in what they see as meaningful activities, who are included in the decision making, feel safe and secure in supportive environments. They have better health and better mental health, and they're more likely to be engaged in pro-social activities, schooling, family life, positive stuff, civic activities, employment, and so on, and contribute to the shaping and building of better communities. So it's like stating the bleeding obvious, but the relationship that you build with a young person has enormous power if it's a relationship that's built on safety and trust and a genuine concern and care for that young person. And in that relationship, you don't have to have the answers. You can say, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to help you, but let's figure it out together. In fact, that's a very, very good way to go. So the qualities of relationship-based practice that seem to be very helpful is being authentic, being yourself, being who you are, right? Warts and all, if you want to put it that way. And that means, well, for me, it means if I'm listening to somebody and my mind drifts off somewhere else, I do not attempt to bullshit them. I say, I'm sorry, I lost track of what you were saying. And I try to get back on track. If I have a headache or don't feel great, I will say to the young person, sorry if I seem a bit distracted, I've got a bit of a headache. I believe if we're expecting a young person to tell us all about their world and to be open and honest with us, we need to be honest with them. And that includes, letting them know if we're finding it hard to connect with them in some ways. Having empathy is, I believe, very important. I'll talk more about that in a minute. But empathy seems to be, the antidote for anger and a very, very powerful way to connect with young people to begin to start helping them. As workers, self-awareness is important. And so ask yourself the question, after I spend time working with that young person, am I left with any feelings that I didn't have before I started talking to them? And you quite often, if you've done this for a while, you can become aware that you're picking up feelings from young people. And those feelings are not your feelings, but that self-awareness can clue you into that. And it can be very helpful in understanding what's going on for them. Focusing on strengths is really important, and more on that in a second. Basically means seeing the potential in somebody and instilling a sense of hope. Listening, really, really important. We need to actively listen to young people and show them that we are listening. And we do that by active or reflective listening, playing back what we hear them say. Nowadays, in the world of Zoom, as we are now, you got to be aware that, listening is harder work. When you're listening to somebody and connecting with them on Zoom or FaceTime or other platform like that, there's a lot of information that you don't get, like body language, nuances of facial expressions. You're left with some language and tone of voice and a broad picture. So you have to work harder to listen to young people if you're not face-to-face with them. Respectfully challenging young people, what that means is basically you earn the right to challenge. And if you want to challenge a young person, you earn the right to do so. And it's often about drawing attention to two disparate things and saying, how does that fit together? So like things like saying, all right, so you told me that you really cared about your friend, but you also told me that you put on her Facebook page that you think she's a fat bitch. How does that work? How does hearing from your friend and saying that, how does that work together? So challenging is about saying, how do these two fit? Being collaborative, that's obvious. It means working with the person, working together with the person. Participation, being interested and curious. And I'm going to keep suggesting this to you guys. Play dumb, be curious, use naive inquiry. That's how you get young people to connect and talk to you. You say to them, help me understand what it's like for you. You might say something like, I've never used those drugs. Help me understand what they feel like, you know, or help me understand why you're the one who's always getting into fights at school. Why deliberately and consciously playing a one-down position, a position of not knowing, is a very, very powerful way to help young people. And let's be clear about this. Young people love it when they can, you know, tell you what you don't know and share some of the knowledge of their world with adults who, in their view, perhaps don't fully understand. You need to understand resistance with young people. Often it's either not ready yet, they're not ready yet to engage with you, or there is a fear that if they actually talk to you about something that, you know, the cat's out of the bag, you know, you can't put it back in afterwards. So we have to understand the resistance and work carefully with young people to let them share stuff when they're ready. One interesting approach is if you think a young person has got a secret, they're not telling you about something, and they seem afraid to tell you about something, say this to them, say, okay, I can see that you're not, there's something here that you don't feel comfortable to tell me. I don't want you to tell me that right now because I know you won't anyway, but if you were to tell me about that secret or what you're thinking about, what's the most likely reaction I would have? Would I be disgusted? Would I be shocked? Would I laugh? Would I run screaming from the room and you know, call the cops on you? Like, so asking a person how you would react if they actually did open up and spill the beans often gives you a bit of a sense of the risk and the seriousness of the secret. And often it kind of helps them bring it out anyway. With younger people, by which I mean under 10, I've had a couple of situations where it's been clear that they're being sexually abused by a family member. And I've said to those young people, okay, you've got a secret here. Who else knows the secret? And often kids under 10 will inadvertently give away the name of a perpetrator by asking that question, who else knows the secret? Last couple of things here about relationship-based practice: reliability and flexibility. And I would add to that consistency too. So think about it. The young people you work with, they have been often unfairly treated. They have had unreliable and inflexible parenting and care, often with a lot of harsh discipline. So they need you, if you're going to have that supportive relationship with them, to be reliable, to be flexible, and to be consistent in your approach, and to be transparent about the work you're doing with them so they can feel safe and you can build trust. Okay, I'll ask you guys again, any comments on this? Any stuff you think is particularly important? You go on?
Yep, no, I've got a question.
Yep.
So one of the challenges we find is when to exit someone. When are they not interested? When are they, like, how long do we push for? How long do we, especially when we're not getting a straight answer,
Yeah.
or child safety is involved. So that can be a challenge for us. When do we say, okay, I can see that this isn't the right time for you, everything you're telling me is that, so how about we step back for a while or whatever else, and then Do we step back, exit? Do we step back and say, look, I'll call you again in a month? Because sometimes, I don't know, I feel like we're often hounding them, and we've come up and sort of said, look, if you don't want me, that's fine. Just tell me straight out and I'll stop calling, kind of thing. But that's a really tricky area. So that can be a bit of a challenge.
Okay. It's a great question, complex question. In most cases, and I work with a lot of other NGOs like the Salvos, Anglicare, Bernardo's, Wesley, that type of thing. A lot of services, residential services, they have a set of rules or protocols, and it's things like, if you bring drugs on the premises, you will be exited. If you are aggressive or violent, you will be exited, and so on. So you exit people in some cases when they've broken those rules. That's a fairly obvious one. Generally speaking, you probably want to have warnings, 3 strikes, you're out, that type of thing. You're talking about, when people are not ready to engage. I would say do what you do. You say to them, okay, is this what you want? If it's not what you want, tell us, and we'll put you on a waiting list, or you can come back later. But you basically have a discussion with them, and it's a negotiation, right? If the young person has something that you can deliver to them that they want, such as safe and secure accommodation, they're a lot more motivated. But if they have other options, such as sleeping on a friend's couch and stuff, they might go for that. So the idea is to just make it a negotiation, and to always make it able to be reviewed, and to crunch it down in time. So if they say, okay, well, I'm not really sure, you say, okay, well, how about we give it a couple of weeks, and then we talk again, or you engage with us for a couple of weeks and see how you go, and we'll review after that. But it's the whole idea of case management is that ongoing review of what you're doing with them, but being transparent about what you can offer, but also being transparent about the conditions under which you will help them, and the conditions under which you'll go, sorry, we can't help you with that. So it's not uncommon to compartmentalize things. So you might, for example, say, okay, we can help you with accommodation and things like that, but with mental health issues that you're suffering from, we need to refer you to a psychologist or a counsellor. So you're basically coming up with a case plan. They're involved in the case plan, and if they're not ready, they're not ready. Let them know that they can come back when they are ready, and you will be there. But you might at times have to say to them, okay, we only have X number of beds here, so if you don't take this opportunity now, it might not be around next week. So again, it's about transparency, negotiation, openness, and negotiating the rules of conduct. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I think the other thing is, quite often we're working with young people who have been let down, or people having sort of gone into bat for them. And so it's kind of finding that balance of, I'm here for you, I really want this for you. Obviously, they've got to want it. I totally get that. Yeah. But yeah, it's kind of like, how long do you fight for before you sort of say, okay, look, I'm really getting those really strong signals that you're not interested. But for me, it comes down, I think, is that that willingness, or that trust on them to open up in the first place, and getting through that. So how often do we call before suddenly we're stalking?
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, that's a great way to put it. Yeah. And look, the answer to that is, if you feel that you're chasing them, and you keep chasing them, and they don't give a shit, they're not interested, there comes a point when you say to yourself, okay, I'm doing all the work here. You got to remember, with the young people, it's about getting them to do the work. And if you feel, as you're suggesting, that you kind of slip into this kind of rescue mode, I'm chasing after, I'm doing all of this, then I would say draw a line in that somewhere, but also get their permission. So it might be like, okay, do you want me to send you a text to remind you? Or do you want me to keep calling you? Do you want me to come around and knock on your door? Do you want me to stick a Post-it note on your forehead? Like, what do you need? Or do you want me to back off? It's like asking them what they want, and yeah, kind of not taking it personally, but saying to them, okay, like, you know, I'm a busy person. I've got lots of other clients, and I'm finding that I'm spending a fair bit of time chasing you, and you don't get back to me. Do you want me to stop chasing you, or what? You know, what works for you? And that's good. And generally speaking, I would say, if you've tried 4, 5, 6 times to get hold of somebody in different ways, text, phone calls, you know, FaceTime, message on their door, like if it's 5 or 6 times and they're still not responding, just park it, put it on hold, and come back to it. But make sure that your final message with them is open, in the sense that, you know, when you're ready to talk, here's my number, that type of thing, you know. Yeah, I'm big on the idea of getting young people's permission to treat them in a certain way. You know, I work with some young people who are really, really lazy, and I get their permission to kick them up the bum and say, come on, you told me I could kick you up the bum and remind you. That's what I'm doing, okay? You want me to keep doing this? Okay, you got an appointment today. Get your ass down there, you know. And so it's using that real language and doing what they have asked you to do, but making sure that if you're going to push, you've got their permission to do so. Okay, yeah, thank you. Good question. Yeah. Okay, coming back here. Okay, I'm going to show you a little video here on. This is a little video about empathy. It's a little Brene Brown cartoon. Oops, it's not looking good. Can you see? Can you see a purple screen there with a lady's head in it? You able to see that? Anybody tell me? No, it doesn't think you are. Can you see that one? Share. Can you guys see this video? Can anybody let me know? I'm assuming you can.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, I'm down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
There you go, the wonderful Brene Brown there, talking about empathy. So, like, get that. What she's saying is that, you know, people don't want sympathy. There's a sense of pity there. People want empathy, which drives connection. And it's okay to do empathy and to say things like, I have no idea how you feel. I'm not sure. You can say that, as she's suggesting there, you can say to somebody, you know, I don't know what to say. That's so awful. I don't know how to respond to that. And in doing so, you're acknowledging and validating that it's really, really tough, and that's fine. Empathy is it's a communication thing, but it's a skill, and it's something that can be learned and improved upon if it's something that you do. And generally speaking, the way I think about empathy is, you know, you listen to somebody and you listen to their story, hopefully don't interrupt too much, and then when you've listened to their story, in your mind you say, okay, if I were in that person's shoes, if I were in that situation, what would be the feeling I would be having? What is the most likely feeling I would be having, or different feelings? And then you try to use language to convey your understanding of that feeling in a tentative way. So you don't say, you feel angry or you feel sad, whatever. But what you do is you say things like, it sounds to me like, you know, this is really tough for you. Or what I'm hearing is that this is confusing and scary. So the tentative reflection of feelings, you know, foreshadowed by an opening phrase like it sounds like, or what I'm hearing is, or it seems to me, that is what seems to make effective empathy. But the thing is, even if you misjudge that empathic response, the person doesn't, let's say you say to them, okay, it sounds like you're angry, and they go, I'm not angry, I'm sad. It doesn't matter, because they have put you back on track, and they've corrected you, and they don't see you as like getting it wrong. They see you as trying hard to understand how they're feeling, and you know, working hard to understand. So you've got to give it a go. So okay, so I'll go back on this. Because I'm just back on the slides here. By the way, guys, with these slides, I'll make sure that they are available to you, so that you can have a look at them. Have a look at them later. So I want to start talking about risk assessment and harm reduction. So responding to risk situations, confidentiality does not apply if there is a risk of harm. It should say a serious risk of harm. You need to share your concern and seek help appropriately, which means involving other people. And dealing with young people in crisis requires even better boundaries than normal. And it's worth mentioning, our own anxiety is a normal response to these situations. It's scary when you're having to deal with someone who's really distressed. It's scary when somebody is thinking about or talking about killing themselves. And it's particularly scary if somebody is self-harming and, you know, is really won't let you in and let you connect with them in that way. So one of the ways to think about this stuff is all behaviour has function. So to manage challenging high-risk behaviours, we need to understand that behaviour so we can get suitable management strategies. And quite often we have observable aspects of behaviour, what's happening in front of you with that person, and then there's a lot of hidden aspects of behaviour as well. So this is where we head into things like trauma-informed care, where stuff in the past, traumas in the past, have affected the way that young person relates to others, and they may well relate to you in a certain way because something about you reminds them of somebody in the past who has possibly harmed them, or someone who's treated them really well. So we have to listen carefully and notice when there's you know, stuff beneath the surface that might be relevant. One of the things I'm really big on is with young people, we need to understand that their behaviour has a function. And sometimes that function might be, we might not think that's right, but it's why they do it. So, for example, a function of behaviour might be gaining social attention, looking cool, if you like. So, a kid in the classroom who's bored, stupid, doesn't want to be there, they might just muck up and really annoy the teacher. Because the negative attention from being told off by the teacher, that might be more important to them because it actually gives them a way to escape or avoid demands and access to preferred activities. So if you annoy the teacher enough, you might get sent home or even suspended. And young people do that. Young people are often in a position where they want to be seen as part of the group, be like everybody else, but at the same time be an individual and stand out and be a unique individual. So it's a tension between wanting to belong and be like everybody, but also wanting to have your own opinions and values and things like that as you grow and develop. Sometimes behaviour might be to do with pursuit of power and control over your own life. Quite often, a young person, for example, with ADHD might be fidgety and things like that. And, it's like, well, why are they fidgety? Well, they have to do that. That's their way to expel some of the energy. So it might be reduction of arousal anxiety for them. So it might not be appropriate for them to tap their feet in school, but if they've got a fidget spinner or something like that, that might help them. But there's always some function to behaviour, and basically we look. If we just look at the surface behaviour, we don't always get it. But if we look at the stuff beneath the surface, a lot of the stuff from the past, maybe we might be able to be better informed about the behaviour of that young person. Now, one thing I do feel really strongly about is what is sometimes called attention seeking. When I believe that when working with young people, when people say, oh, he or she was just attention seeking, let's think what we really mean by that. Often we mean that young person is getting our attention, but we do not believe they're going about it in the right way. So I would prefer to reframe attention seeking as attention needing, because that person needs attention, and it just might be that they haven't figured out how to get your attention in what we might see as an appropriate way. So they do things which to get our attention, which are guaranteed to get our attention. So attention seeking is, I believe, attention needing, or it could also be seeking connection in some way. All right. So I just can tell you a very quick case study here. Young woman I worked with, 14-year-old, a little while ago. She came to see me for counselling. She turned up with a youth worker, and as soon as she saw me, she didn't feel comfortable to talk to me because I'm older and male. And for the first 10 minutes of the counselling session, in which the youth worker was with this girl, I'll call the girl Mary, the girl was whispering in the youth worker's ear, and the youth worker was saying things like, it's okay, you can tell him that, that's not a problem. And it became clear that she was very fearful of sharing certain information. So after about 10 minutes of whispering in the youth worker's ear, the girl settled down. I'm calling her Mary. She's about 14 and a half. And she told me what had been happening. And this is me being very honest. Because I have ADHD, I have to really work hard to listen to people. And so what I do personally is I listen to the person's story. And after about 4 or 5 minutes, I stop them and go, okay, can I see if I've understood? And I do what I call summary, where I try to play back to that person in point form the main points of their story to see if I've understood. So this is what I said to Mary after I'd listened to her story. Okay, so your mum and dad split up 2 years ago. Your dad is now living with your mum's ex-best friend, who you referred to as the bitch that broke up your family. You and your mum have been living together in an apartment for the last couple of years, and everything's been okay. But then a few months back, your mum started going on dating sites and she got a new boyfriend who moved into your place a month ago with your mum. And while your mum was in bed asleep in the middle of the night, her new boyfriend will come into your room and touch you up. And when you actually told your mum this, she called you a lying effing little bitch and booted you out of home, and you're now in a youth refuge. Is that right? So that was my summary of her story that she told me. And I intentionally did it that way to try and make sure I'd understood the main points. So she was surprised that I was so direct, and she said, yeah, that's right. So I thought, okay, I'll do some empathy. So I said, okay. And what I'm thinking was, if that were me, I would be so angry, it's what felt like betrayal by mum and sexual abuse by a new boyfriend. And so I said, so Mary, you must be so, angry. And she said, I'm not angry, I'm sad. So I retreat to my position of play dumb, be curious. I said, okay, all right. So I actually said, if it was me, I'd be so angry. But if you're not angry, what are you? She said, I'm sad. And I said, tell me about that sadness. And she said, I'm sad my mum and dad split up. I'm sad that my dad's living with my mum's ex-best friend. I'm sad that my mum trusts her new boyfriend. And I'm really sad that, she doesn't believe me, that he was sexually abusing me. And I'm really sad that, I can't live home with my mum anymore because she believes him, not me. And as she's saying it, you can hear the anger rising in her voice. And she goes, yes, and I'm angry too, So I had got it wrong. I had seen it as anger, but it was really predominantly sadness. But the sadness was kind of keeping a lid on the anger. So once I've acknowledged and validated that anger, we can move forward and do stuff about it. And so we talked about what she wanted to do, including the options of making a report to the police and stuff. And she then said, then started whispering in the youth worker's ear again. And the youth worker said, okay, you can show him. And I said, well, what's going on? And so Mary, she pulled up her sleeve like this, and she showed me that on her wrist, she had a number of scratches, which she had done with the lid of a pen. And so what I did, I don't normally do this, but it's important. She's holding a hand out like this. I said, are you okay if I touch your hand, Mary? She's like, yeah. So I put my hand here, not on the bit where it was scratched. And I said, you must have been having some crappy feelings to do that. I would imagine that they were to do with your mum's, dickhead boyfriend and what he was doing. And she looked shocked. She went, yeah. And I said, and I imagine you probably felt a little bit better after doing that. And she said, yeah, why is that? And I said, well, my understanding is because the brain produces endorphins, which are painkillers, neurotransmitter painkillers. And a lot of my other clients tell me that, they can't cope with what's going on in here in the emotions, but when they injure themselves, they temporarily feel a bit better. So that was good. That was positive. And what was important, and why I put my hand there, was I wasn't going to shame her, make her feel bad. I was going to acknowledge and validate that that's kind of normalized in a way. That's what some people do, and that's how they find it helps. So I take my hand away, and she's still holding her hand out like this. So I thought, okay, she wants something. So I said to her, it looks like that's a couple of days old and it's kind of healing up. I said, still looks a bit sore though. Do you want me to put some Band-Aids on that for you? And she's like, yes, please. Now it didn't need the Band-Aids, but I figured out that, okay, she's holding her hand out like this. Is she attention seeking? No. Is she attention needing? Yes. Is she seeking connection? Yes. So I said to, I've got counselling rooms at Mission Australia in Sydney. So I said, okay, we have some protocols here. I've got to put on some rubber gloves and I've got to get the little alcohol swab and it's going to sting. And I very gently, cleaned it up and then put, 3 Bart Simpson Band-Aids were enough to cover it up. Okay. Did it need the Band-Aids? No, it didn't. But did she need to see that I would treat her with respect and dignity and accept that her self-injury wasn't because she was being difficult or attention-seeking, it was because she was hurting. And so I did that. And she was thankful for that. So we talked a bit more. I went story has a happy ending. I had a couple of more counselling sessions with her. Mum dumped the boyfriend. She made a police report about what had happened. And I saw her 3 weeks later, and she came in and she had no self-injury. And I said to her, "Hey, Mary, you look great, fantastic." I said, "You're wearing a short sleeve shirt. It looks like you've all healed up." And she said, "Yeah." She said, "Oh, I'm working in an ice cream shop. I have to wear this ugly pink short sleeve shirt." And I said to her, "Okay, well, that's great, but I'm concerned. Like when I saw you before, you were self-injuring. Are you, can you tell me, are you still self-injuring? You're not doing it on a part of your body that you won't be able to show me, are you?" And she said, "Oh, no, 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 no." I said, "So how did you stop self-injuring?" And her response was fantastic. She said, "I wouldn't give him the effing pleasure." Now, she always referred to him as him. She never used his name. So she had made the connection that the need to self-injure was because of Mum's now ex-boyfriend, and that if she self-injured again, he was getting to her. So we found that other things like counselling, mindfulness, relaxation practice were substitutes for that. But it all worked well. But the moral of the story is, I needed to connect with her at her point of need. I needed not to shame her. I needed to help her feel safe and recognize that self-injury is something that people do. And they do it for a sense of temporary relief, not to be difficult. Any comments or observations about that story before I move on? Okay. Okay, so I'm talking now about risk of harm. I believe that there are three main types of at risk of harm, and that each of them has a slightly different approach. So the story I just told you about the girl who I'm calling Mary, she was at risk of harm to herself. The clinical literature refers to this as internalizing behaviours and emotions, and it tends to be more females than males. So a young woman who's under stress or there's a lot of crap going on would often shut down, perhaps become depressed, cry a lot. So mental health issues like depression, self-injury, and indeed suicidal behaviours, that person is at risk of harm to themselves because they try to do things to feel better, which can cause them harm. So they withdraw, they shut down, and it would include behaviours that might potentially cause harm, like having unsafe sex or drug and alcohol abuse as a kind of form of self-medication, right? So if somebody is at risk of harm to themselves, what do they need? Well, it's obvious. What they need is your attention. They need you to go and listen to them and talk to them and explore what's going on, and perhaps give them some strategies to manage those emotions. Strategies to regulate their emotions, to calm down, this type of thing. They might need you to refer them to professional help, for example, a GP or a psychologist for treatment for depression and things like that, which might not always be medication, but they definitely need you to kind of get in there and connect with them in that way, because they're internalizing behavior is they're shutting down, they're withdrawing. So you need to, in a sense, pursue them in a very gentle way. So that's the first category, at risk of harm to self. Second group is at risk of harm to others. These are externalizing behaviors and emotions, tends to be more males than females, so the gap is decreasing. Would include aggression, violence, even manipulation, bullying, being a sexual predator, antisocial and criminal behaviors, where the person, more likely male than female, externalizes feelings and stuff and impacts others. So if you are working with somebody who is at risk of harm to others, what do they need? Well, they need quite a firm approach of what I would call containment. They need help with recognizing that if they continue to hurt other people and do activities that are going to cause damage to people or even to property, that eventually they will be probably legally charged and that they will be contained. It's called juvenile justice. If they're over 18, it's called jail. You will be contained with these behaviours. And I often point out, particularly to aggressive males, if you keep doing that and you hurt enough people, not only will you be contained by being locked up, you will be chemically contained. You will be medically sedated with drugs like risperidone, Catapress, Zyprexa, this type of stuff, large doses of Seroquel, which will take all the fight out of you, and you will be, turned into a dribbling, shuffling, robot. You won't have any fight in you. And so I try and appeal to those young males usually. Would you rather work with me and we'll do some anger management, help you learn ways to contain your anger and your strong emotions? Or do you want to wait until things get so bad when you are physically contained by being locked up or chemically restrained on a community treatment order? That usually gets their attention, but you do have to not pose it as a threat, but more as a curious question. What would happen if you keep doing what you're doing? Do you think that if you don't pull your head in, that eventually, it's going to catch up with you, and it's going to really limit your lifestyle? So these tend to be more males at risk of harm to others, and the most extreme of that is obviously homicide. Last year I was working for correctional services in New South Wales with violent offenders. I was running groups for DV offenders, violent offenders who just got out of jail. And it was really, really, really hard work. But one of the things which I'm sharing with you, which I think is useful, is when a person is angry and when they have aggressive or violent behaviours, externalizing behaviours, don't say to them, stop being angry, because they're more likely to get upset and try and punch you in the face. Listen to them and try and get behind the anger. And you can often hear that in their world, the reason for their anger is due to a real or perceived sense of injustice. In other words, it's not fair. Now, it doesn't matter whether it's real or perceived injustice, but human beings get angry when they feel they are being unfairly treated, or when they see someone else unfairly treated. So to stop somebody being angry, don't try and stop them, listen to them, and get behind that anger to the feeling of hurt, and say things like that. I can hear you hurt because it's not fair that you've been, charged with this crime in your eyes. It's not fair that you've been treated this way by the youth workers. That way you can talk about anger. And the other way to talk about these type of things is in what narrative therapy refers to as an externalizing conversation. How does your anger get you into trouble? How does anger make you do things that you later regret? How does anger trick you into, getting into fights even when you're trying not to get into fights? So by separating the person, in this case, from the anger, and talking about how the anger influences them and how they can influence the anger, it lowers the temperature a lot more, and you can have better conversations about that. Okay, the third group of people, these are at risk of harm from others. So first one's at risk of harm to self, second one's at risk of harm to others, third group at risk of harm from others. And these are people who are different in some way usually, and that difference makes them vulnerable. Tends to be pretty much equal number of males and females, but their vulnerability and their difference might be due to their development, so physical and psychological development. So when I was at school in England, when I was 11, I was the short guy with the big nose. So I got picked on because of those physical differences, right? Psychological difference might be the kid who's a bit immature compared to the other kids. It could be a person's ethnicity, certainly could be their sexual orientation, the 1 in 10 of us who are gay. Physical features, so skin colour, size or shape of your body. And let's call a spade a spade. The fat kid gets picked on. The kid with red hair gets picked on. The Asian kid in a group of white Anglo kids gets picked on because of that difference. So we need to accept that, and the way we help those people at risk of harm from others, if you like, victims, is we attempt to reframe them from being a victim to being a survivor. So you're coping with stuff which other people would have difficulty coping with. And we try to talk about their difference in a positive way, looking for strengths so that they can actually get support, which is going to work for them as an individual. So these type of people might include those with intellectual and learning disabilities, autism and Asperger's, which I'm sure you guys know about. And my rule is that, you know, if somebody's different and their difference is causing them to be picked on, I'm going to talk to them honestly and openly about that difference and try and frame it not as a disability but a different ability, and try and help them get some skills and capacities to actually stay safe and push back. So I'm currently working with quite a few young people on the autism spectrum disorder. Most of them will be seen as Asperger's, high functioning autism. And indeed, yesterday I went to court with a young person who was had a criminal charge of assault, and I worked very hard to write a report, and I appeared as a witness. And this young person was basically, the charge was dismissed because I was able to demonstrate that their being on the autism spectrum meant they had difficulty controlling their emotions and their anger, and that they were deemed to be cognitively impaired as a result of autism, and the charge was dismissed. And the charge was an assault charge where they had basically reacted to somebody who was attacking them. So the moral of this is, if somebody is different, get the balls to talk to them about that difference, focus on their strengths, and try and get their permission to help them in ways that are useful. So if somebody's being bullied, you know, talk to them about, you know, could they find a buddy to be with? What could they actually say to the bully or bullies about what's happening, you know, so they and get help and stuff like that. But give them stuff that they can actually use, and that's really important. So we're talking about helpful communication. I'm not suggesting that you scream at young people through a megaphone, but sometimes it might be useful. Helpful communication is plain, honest, and truthful. It's specific. It states what you can or you can't offer. So that's a boundary issue. If somebody says to you, if a young person says to you, can you lend me $20? You want to say, sorry, I can't do that. You know, I'd lose my job, whatever. You need to be specific about that. Helpful and constructive communication is single concept, one thing at a time. And so if they're talking about loads of things, you say, okay, no, let's just talk about this for the moment. Let's talk about what we're going to do about your criminal charge or whatever. It includes emotions, meaning empathy, so how that person feels about. And constructive communication is without jargon, using real language. And by this, I mean talking to young people, listening to the way they talk and using similar language, but not mimicking them or using language that you do not know the meaning of. If a young person uses an expression that you've never heard before, say to them, what's that mean? I don't know what that means. And yes, they will laugh at you, but that's okay, because, you know, you're putting them in the position of expert, and they are educating you. With real language, I don't mean, you know, use the F word if that's, you know, what the young person does, but sometimes, you know, saying something like, I can hear you're really pissed off about that, is more useful as a form of communication than saying, I can hear you're really concerned about that. And as we try and help people in a, I suppose, a problem-solving way, the communication contains a future narrative about, you know, what they'd like to happen next, or what's a way forward from here. It can be hard work, but it can be done. If you feel that you're not connecting with a young person around language, listen carefully to the way they talk, and you will notice that some young people, or some people generally, use language that is very visual. So they say things like, oh, I see what you mean, you know, that looks right to me. I see where you're going with that. You know, that paints a picture for me. So that's using language with visual metaphor. Other people use language with auditory metaphor. They say, oh, I hear what you're saying. That sounds right to me. That's music to my ears. That rings a bell, you know, all that type of stuff. And other people are more kind of physical. They go, oh, I felt sick when I heard that, you know. He's a pain in the ass, you know. Oh, you know, I feel my back's against the wall. I'm at the end of my rope, you know. So if you listen to the way they talk and you gently and not in a mimicking way mirror that language, you will often find that the connection increases with that young person because you're kind of getting on their wavelength. But, and I mean this quite seriously, do not bullshit them. Do not fake knowing, because young people have very, very, very finely tuned bullshit detectors, and they will spot it a mile off. And most young people hate fake. They really hate it. So be honest, be yourself. Okay, not worry about that. So common barriers to helpful communication: lack of trust or rapport. In other words, not taking the time to build that trust and rapport. Prescriptive advice, by which I mean telling them what you think they should do. Doesn't seem to be helpful. Suggestions are better than advice. And ideally giving that young person a menu of options. Okay, so what do you think you can do? Okay, you can do these different things. What's going to work for you? Talking too much, not giving them time to tell their story is another good one. Often we listen to people and we're not really listening. We're thinking about, what am I going to say back? Not helpful. You need to try and listen more. Asking too many questions can be problematic in that it steers the conversation. Better off to wait a little bit and ask questions to check things out. So closed questions: are you angry at your mum? Yes or no? On open-ended questions: how do you feel about the fact that your mum forgot your birthday? You know, being critical and or judgmental obviously is a problem. And be aware that 85% of your communication is non-verbal. So only 15% is language. So being critical and or judgmental, you might not be saying it, but it might come out in your body language or your facial expression or something like that. So be aware of that. Contradicting or arguing with a person is a concern, and being disrespectful of that person's perspective. So, you know, sometimes you got to go, okay, so I don't see it that way, but, you know, we'll agree to differ. That's the way you see it. That's more respectful than arguing, you know, and choosing battles that you can't do. I'm often asked with counselling, what is it? Is it fixing problems, whatever? I honestly believe that counselling is about making people feel heard and understood. So if you make sure a young person feels heard and understood, once they feel heard and understood and you've checked it out, you can then move forward and do something to help them. So by listening and validating, acknowledging feelings, we help people to manage their problems or issues and to consider change. Okay, just a word here on empathy. Oops. So, have you ever said, and I know I have, and I still do it sometimes, to another person, I understand how you feel, I know how you feel, or I know what that's like. Well, do you really? Let's be honest here. When the emotions are running high and you say to somebody else, I understand how you feel, they often cannot imagine that, you know, you'd have any sense of how it really feels. So they get quite angry and say, no, you bloody well don't understand how I feel. Right? So rather than saying, I understand or I know how you feel, try not to say that. It's a lot better to be tentative and do empathy. So sounds to me like you're upset, you know, because your mum forgot your birthday or the teacher's been picking on you. It doesn't matter whether it's real or perceived, but, you know, we want to try and help people feel heard and understood, and not be so arrogant to assume that we know how they feel, even if they've had an identical experience. So be safe, be tentative when you do empathy. Okay, so responding to self-harm and risky behaviours with young people. I mean this seriously. It takes courage. It takes courage to actually go there when somebody else is really distressed, particularly if they're suicidal. It takes a lot of courage. And it's important to choose to do that rather than be pushed into it. But it's important to recognize what's going on for you. And in most cases, after you've had the interaction with the young person, to seek some support yourself. So I'm talking about self-injury. So self-injury or self-harm, the most currently politically correct terms is deliberate self-injury or non-suicidal self-injury, NSSI. So self-harm is behaviour that some people engage in when they're very stressed, and they tell me it provides a temporary sense of relief. And I say, you know, with the young people you work with who self-injure, ask them what it feels like. Ask them if it makes them feel better. They will educate you about that. They like to tell people. But, so when people self-harm, they're not necessarily suicidal. In fact, I would go further and say that the majority of young people I've worked with who self-harm, they tell me this makes me less likely to attempt to end my life. It makes me less suicidal. So we now have the clinical term of non-suicidal self-injury, which is in the, where it goes, the very famous DSM here since 2013. And so by definition, self-harm is not an attempt to die. It's seen as a maladaptive coping strategy. Now, the problem with self-harm is, although apparently it's effective in the short term, it can be addictive or even contagious. So it's not uncommon to see young people have self-harm that's increasing with their distress. So they get to the point where they're cutting more deeply. Excuse me. And the contagion is where groups start to do it. And self-harm itself is on a continuum where the ultimate contagion and problem with self-harm is where a person actually tries to end their life, which is what suicide is. So ask me some questions about self-harm while I have a bit of a cough here. Do you work with people who self-harm? How do you go with that?
One thing I've always, because I've heard it, like suicide can be contagious as well, is what is actually going on for the young people where it can be contagious, and how do we avoid, you know, like young people who might be experiencing that contagion?
Yeah, great question. Thank you, Liam. Yeah, the contagion occurs when usually one person has really a good reason for self-harm or to be really, really depressed and start to feel suicidal. And it's other people around them who have similar but unexpressed feelings. So they kind of jump on the bandwagon in that way. So when somebody sees a friend going, you know, I'm really depressed, I'm suicidal, and that person gets help, quite often it gives other people through contagion the opportunity to bring it out. But the problem is when it becomes secretive and you get small groups of people who share often their self-harming in that small group. I've worked with groups of teenage girls who have like cutting clubs, and there might be 5 girls, one of whom has had terrible trauma or abuse, which has led to the self-injury, and the others, you know, they haven't had that happen to them, but they're pretty miserable. So they jump on the idea of this will help me feel better, and it gives them a sense of connection and belonging. So that sense of contagion, I believe, is to do with a sense of connection and belonging through a shared sense of discomfort or, you know, underlying distress. And the way we deal with it is talk about it in schools. And the best way really to talk about it is to educate young people on, if your friend or if you know somebody in your group or a friend and they are having a tough time, you know, you need to help. You need to redirect your friend to professional help. And so that's why earlier on I was saying those discussions around 13 Reasons Why as a TV show are really important, because they I open up, they unpack all that stuff about why didn't she seek help and what we're going to do, you know. And you sometimes have to be really, really direct with people generally and say, if somebody asks you to keep a secret about something and they don't tell you what the secret is about, you do not promise to keep that secret. Because if someone, and it's happened to me loads of times and to a lot of workers over the years, some will come and go, hey, Liam, you know, you're a really nice person. Can I tell you something? Promise you won't tell anybody else. And if you say, yes, go ahead, and I then say, I'm thinking of killing myself, you're screwed because you promised to keep the secret. So we educate young people about how to look after their friends and not to keep secrets, and where their friend needs help to redirect to, you know, to a professional. And if there aren't professionals who can seem to help that person, go online there, you know, say go to Beyond Blue or Kids Helpline or Lifeline, that type of stuff, you know, so the person can get help with a little more anonymity, and that will work, you know. Okay. Okay. So basically with self-injury, my suggestions are what you do. Rule number one, do not shame people. Do not draw attention to it in front of other people, right? What I suggest you do is if you see a young person has a self-injury and they might well be hiding it, you might take them aside and say something like this: I have noticed that you have some scratches on your arm, or I have noticed that you've got what looks like a cigarette burn on your ankle. And say something like, you must be having some pretty crappy feelings at the moment to need to do that. Can you talk to me about what's going on? Now, by doing that, firstly, you're commenting or noticing. You're not, you know, shaming them and exposing it. And you're making the link between dysphoric mental states, feeling like crap, and needing to do that. Most young people will then go, okay, you understand me, you know why I'm doing this, and you're not going to make me feel bad. And if they aren't comfortable to talk to you about it, say, are you talking to somebody else about that? And encourage them to do so. Who is a safe person that you could talk to about this? Now, when somebody is self-injuring, try not to get angry with them or criticize them. Do try to listen about what's going on. Try not to show your frustration if they keep doing it. And this is important, do suggest some alternatives to self-harm. I'm very proud of my self-harming clients. They give me some amazing list of different things that people can do, which are harm reduction for self-harm. One girl I work with, and she came from a horrible background of abuse. When she wanted to self-harm, she would listen to certain music, and the music she liked listening to was a song called Hurt by the band 9 Inch Nails, but there's a version by Johnny Cash. And the song Hurt, the first line of it is, I hurt myself today to see if I still feel. And she felt that song helped her not self-harm, because she realized that there's other people out there in the world who do what she does. The second thing she taught me was red texture. When she wanted to draw on herself, when she wanted to cut herself, she would alternate that with drawing on herself with red texture. I won't tell you the what she wrote on herself because it was pretty full on, but it helped her. A third one is squeezy bottle of tomato sauce. Red, slippery, looks like blood. These are all harm reduction things. Yeah, and there was two more. One was ice cubes. It's quite common. Hold ice cubes when you want to self-harm. And this particular girl, she would, in the youth refuge, she would put red food dye in ice cubes, you know, and then melt red ice cubes on her skin, which she said helped. And the other one was bite of red hot chili, which wouldn't do harm, but it gave that jolt, you know. So say to young people, I've heard of other young people who self-harm, who find that they sometimes can do one of those things, and ask them if they know any other ones too. And there is an app, I'm putting in the chat line here. There's an app called Calm Harm. It's a phone app, and it gives you a bunch of things that you can put in there so that when you feel the urge to self-harm, you can either listen to a piece of music or, you know, do certain activities like running on the spot to get you through that. And I hear that's very helpful for quite a few young people. Anybody got any other harm reduction suggestions for self-harm that I haven't mentioned?
Say it again.
I know about here from back here. A cold shower is something that people have said works well.
Yeah, brilliant.
Rubber band around the wrist and
Yeah.
flick the rubber band.
Excellent. Yeah, brilliant. Bubble wrap. Pop, 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 pop. Sounds crazy, but some people do that. Yeah, great examples there. Yeah, and you know, the list is endless. But, you know, basically harm reduction is something that does not injure the person in a substantial way, and can be substituted for self-harm. But be aware that all those harm reduction approaches, good though they are, they, according to young people, they're not as effective as actually self-harming. So we might have to go for the dialectical behaviour therapy approaches of teaching distress tolerance and emotional regulation over time. And we might have to accept that sometimes some people will still have to self-harm, but the goal is over time to make it less frequent. Okay, so in my humble opinion, self-harm is a way to manage pain, to manage what a young person sees as intolerable, inescapable pain. And so if self-harm is a way to manage pain, in my humble opinion, and based on a lot of work with young people, suicide is a way to stop pain. All right. So suicide is when the person usually has had a long period of depression and they reach this tipping point where they can't remember what it's like to feel good. They can't remember any positive feelings. They are so depressed that, you know, they're sleeping all the time or not sleeping at all. They have poor appetite. They're not doing things that normally bring them joy and pleasure, like listening to music or skateboarding or whatever. And it's got to the point where the thoughts in their head are so overwhelming that the option of death becomes more and more viable. So on that continuum where, you know, one end you've got mental wellness and the other end you've got severe unwellness, up the unwell end, that's when people want to die. As you move down the continuum from wellness, self-injury, self-harm seems to be a way to slow down the progression towards suicide. So a lot of people who self-harm might have suicidal thoughts and feelings, but they find that the self-harm gives them a temporary sense of relief, and therefore it's a survival tool in that way. And just one more thing on the self-harm and the attention seeking. People say to me, oh, you know, she's just self-harming because she's attention seeking. And my response is that may be so, but then why is she hiding it? How can it be attention seeking if you don't want to show it to people? Get over it. It's not attention seeking, it's attention needing. This person needs help. You know? So with suicide, and I'm not going to dwell on this, there are important risk factors, and it's important to be aware of these. So being male is certainly one of them. Males are more likely to attempt to end their life, arguably because they choose more lethal means, particularly in rural areas if they've got a gun or something like that, or they can't, you know, they're isolated and they can't get help. Females tend to choose less immediately lethal means. So girls will often take an overdose of tablets, sleeping tablets, or painkillers like oxycodone or Vicodin, whereas males are more inclined to try and hang themselves when nobody is around, drive a car off a cliff or jump off a high building or something like that. And that's a one-way ticket. Being Indigenous is a high risk factor for suicide. So an Indigenous male who is depressed is at massive risk and needs to be monitored essentially. Depression is a significant factor in well over 95% of suicide attempts. And it might not be diagnosed, but often you'll see young people who've had a long period of being very low, very distressed. And they start to get to the point, and it sounds weird, but where they suddenly seem a bit too happy. And that is quite often because after a long depression, they have decided that they are going to end their life, and they feel relieved. They feel relieved that they finally have a way out of the emotional pain that they're suffering. And so if you work with a young person who's been depressed and maybe has some self-harm, and they suddenly seem a bit too happy, and particularly if they start giving away possessions or saying things like, you won't have to worry about me anymore, or I'm going away, and they're not specific where, be concerned. Ask them direct questions, because it's quite possible that they've decided to end their life and they have a availability of a lethal means, and they're going to do it. And yeah, it can be really hard work, but you have to trust your instinct and go very gently and engage that person. Psychosis can be a risk factor in suicide, but not so much for young people. It's more older people. Although with some of the synthetic marijuana and things like that, it can induce psychosis, meaning out of touch with reality, and lead a person to attempt to take their life. Alcohol is definitely a concern. And I don't just mean, like a young person who is drinking or is using drugs. I mean a young person where there is a sudden increase in their drug and alcohol use, and particularly alcohol, because it disinhibits people. So a young person who is depressed perhaps has a couple of beers, they feel a little bit better, but they drink a whole 6-pack, it takes the brakes off, and they are more likely to attempt to harm themselves seriously when they're boozed up. So try and slow them down with that, take it away if it's actually there. Social network, or absence of a current social network, is really important. Young people who are suicidal will often withdraw from friends, and it can often be driven by breakdown in friendships and close relationships with friends and family. So asking about the social network, who cares for you, who will look after you if you're unwell, that type of thing is important. And here's the big stuff: having a current plan, like it's obvious, and you need to ask people about that. A previous attempt is a significant factor as well. If somebody's had a previous suicide attempt, you ask them, you say, have you tried to kill yourself before? If they say, yes, I did, you say to them, can you tell me what happened then? What was going on? And how come you're not dead? How come you're alive? What helped you stay safe and alive then? And you can get good information that way. And again, sexual orientation. The 1 in 10 adults or young people who are gay, a big significant factor. So look at it as like, if you have a few of these, there's a real concern. So what do you do if you think somebody is at high risk of harming themselves? Any type of suicide risk assessment and training course has these main concepts in it. You ask direct questions about the risk, and it means saying to a young person, asking them questions about intent. Do you intend to kill yourself? Are you telling me that you want to die? Are you saying that you're thinking about ending your life? It doesn't matter how you say it, but a direct, closed question about do you have the intent to harm yourself or die is how you actually get to it. Now, and I don't mean this to sound flippant, so please don't take it as such. If a young person is talking to you and they're saying, yeah, I want to die, and even if they're talking about how and when they're going to do it, see it as a privilege. See it as that's great, because they're not dead yet. If they were completely suicidal, they would be dead. And people don't like hearing this, but young people know how to kill themselves, and they know they can do it. And you could probably not stop them if they actually seriously intended to do it. So be grateful and see it as a privilege and an opportunity when they talk to you about this stuff, and they do share terrible, terrible fears and distress about ending their life because they're not dead yet. So you say to them, are you telling me you want to die? And if you tick that box, yes, they have an intent to harm themselves. You say, how are you going to do it? How are you thinking about ending your life? And you ask them about that. Quite often, young people who are a bit depressed and having a tough time, they are thinking about it. They have thoughts of suicide, but they don't really have means or a plan. But as they get more depressed and more distressed, they start to think about how they would do it. So a person with the intent, wanting to die, person who is thinking about or getting together a lethal means, such as sleeping tablets, such as powerful painkillers, opiate-based painkillers, such as a rope on which to hang themselves or a belt, that might increases the risk dramatically, and it needs to be acknowledged. If you talk to somebody and they say, yes, I'm going to take 40 Panadine, what I do is I say to them, okay, so do you have those Panadine? And if they say yes, they're in my bag, I say to them, okay, would you be okay for me to look after those for you? I don't say give it to me, because that's coercive. But and I've done it quite a few times, I've said to a young person, okay, you've got some pills there and you want to, which you want to use to kill yourself. Are you okay if I look after those, so that, to slow this down? And they nearly always are. They're grateful because they feel out of control. And so if you're giving them a bit more control by removing the means, that helps. So if they have the intent, they have a lethal or available lethal means, the next question is when? When are you going to do this? All right. So if you tick all three of those boxes, they have the intent to die, they have a lethal available means, and a current plan, which is, fairly precise, not like sometime in the next year, but like, end of the week or today or tomorrow. And you've ticked all those boxes, that is mandatory reporting. And at that point, you say to that young person, I don't want you to die. I really don't want you to harm yourself, but I'm really concerned about you. This is one of those things where we need to involve other people. So what do we do now to keep you safe? All right. And the interesting thing is, I have done this hundreds of times. And when I've said that to young people, okay, I'm concerned for you, I don't want you to die. You've got everything in place to end your life. Thank you for sharing this with me. They say thank you back. They say thank you for believing me. Thank you for taking me seriously and not seeing me as attention seeking or whatever. The subtext of what the young person is saying is, I feel out of control, and unless you intervene and help me, there's a likelihood I will die. There's a couple of other questions which you can use once you've gone through this basic risk assessment. And people are shocked by it, but I regularly say to young people who are feeling suicidal, if you died today, what would be the result of your death? And they say things like, oh, those other people would really listen to me. They'd know how hurt I am, or they'd take me seriously, things like that. So what would be the result of your death if you died? More often, what they actually say is, I would not hurt anymore, right? So that's why I say suicide is to stop pain. So a serious suicide attempt is a way to stop what is perceived as intolerable pain. So talking about that pain, what has happened, what are you feeling that's led you to this point, is really, really important. I also often use a scaling technique. I say on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is you have the intent and the means and a plan to end your life, and 1 is you feel fantastic. Where are you on that scale of 1 to 10? And quite often they'll say, I'm a 7 or an 8. And I'll say, okay, what do we need to get you back down? Sometimes they say, I'm an 11. And I say, okay, so what do you want me to do? Do you want me to call an ambulance? Do you want me to take you to hospital? But these are just all ways to have serious, direct risk assessment conversations with young people. And let me assure you, you can do no harm by actually talking to young people in this way. They're usually grateful for it. you will not give them the idea. You know, they either have the idea or they don't. Okay. Yeah, I don't have very long now. Any last questions about suicidality before I just do a last bit here? Take that silence. Okay. Okay. Last thing I need to talk to you guys about, and I know we're finishing up. We might run a little bit over here. Self-care. What can you do to manage your stress? The reality of this type of work with high-risk behaviours is that it will impact you. It's not a matter of whether or not it will impact you. It will impact you. Working with young people is challenging. It can be rewarding, but it's extremely challenging and can be very emotionally challenging. So you need to think about what you do to manage your stress. It's important to recognize in terms of self-care that empathy comes at a cost. When I say empathy is courageous, I mean you're going there, you're allowing yourself to feel what other people are sharing with you. And, if you get close and you connect and have rapport with somebody who is feeling like they want to die, it's not uncommon for you to feel a bit flat and a bit down afterwards. So burnout, another phrase for that is compassion fatigue. And what I suggest you do, as I mentioned earlier, is continually monitor your feelings. Figure out, what you feel before and after interactions with young people. And particularly if they're suicidal or whatever, ask yourself, how was I feeling before? How am I feeling now? That way you can actually say, well, I picked up these feelings. I feel anxious, whereas I didn't before because I've connected with this young person. You can then say, what am I going to do with those feelings? And you all have different means. So it might be, you need to get outside in the sunshine. Might be you need to talk to a safe person. It might be that you need to do some mindfulness or take the dog for a walk, but you need to have ways to manage your feelings. And if the feelings stay with you, you need to be prepared to talk to a professional about that. Ideally, you all get supervision and can have debriefing. That can be really important and powerful. Make use of it. But if you don't, set up informal debriefing supervision with a colleague that you trust, which basically is, if I have a tough day, I'll dump on you. And if you have a tough day, you can dump on me for 10 minutes and make it a double-sided arrangement. It can be really, really powerful. So just finishing up, and sorry about running over a little bit here. What's in your emotional first aid kit? What can you do to calm yourself down when things get stressful? What can you do that you can actually use to help other people? Might be take a few deep breaths. It might be visualization or mindfulness. It might be, listen to certain music or whatever, but figure out what you do to look after yourself and use that with young people. And so please be prepared to talk to a safe person about your feelings, somebody who you trust. Know when to refer young people on to professional help, and know your limits. Don't keep secrets when a person is at risk of harm. And for yourself, please establish and maintain appropriate boundaries of time, boundaries of space, like in other words, where you work with a person and how long you work with them, and personal boundaries. Be prepared for a young person to ask you questions like, are you gay? Have you ever used drugs? Where do you live? What's your mobile phone number? Have you ever taken medicine for depression? Be prepared for all of these questions. And when they are asked of you, be prepared to give back a response which is honest, but only discloses as much as you are comfortable with, and then puts the focus back on the person. So, for example, somebody said to me the other day, he said, there was a lovely young guy, he's about 19, and he said, Phil, are you gay? I said, I'm not gay. My brother's gay. Tell me more why you're asking. And he said, because I'm in a very Christian family and I'm not sure how my mum and dad will go when I tell them I think I'm gay. And he then said to me, what's your favourite drugs? He said, I understand you worked as a musician. You must have taken loads of drugs. And my answer was, I drink a bit too much coffee and I like red wine occasionally, but tell me more about why you like smoking weed. So I was answering his questions carefully and I was putting the focus back onto him quickly. So monitor your feelings and emotions. If you are left with strong, overwhelming thoughts and feelings, please use distancing techniques, limiting your exposure to what's going on. It can be things like imagining seeing the event on a screen, a TV screen, and changing the TV channel there. You know, and please talk to somebody if you need debrief and supervision. And I think you can hear my grandkid in the next room screaming. It's happiness. It's not distress. You know, please talk to somebody. And finally, please look after yourselves and look after each other. And remember that young people, they can be, you know, they are our future, and we need to build relationships with them on their terms, and we want to try and help them. So thank you for listening to me, guys. Finally, any questions? Can you hear the kid? Can you hear the kid in the background? Yeah, that's my little granddaughter Paige. I've got 4 grandkids, and she's the youngest one, and she's hanging out with my wife today. Yeah. Questions, thoughts, feedback?
I have a question.
You've got to take it off.
Yeah. So we're seeing, you know, there's lots of money being poured into mental health support and stuff, but it seems like we're seeing more and more people, young people, come through with more problems. And I was just wondering, sort of, why?
Okay. Several things. The stress of modern life. You know, COVID, you know, pandemics, bushfires, all this type of stuff. But for young people, the particular stresses they have to deal with are things we've never ever seen before. You know, people say to me, young people, you know, they've all got the internet and they've got mobile phones and tablets and computers and social media and stuff like that. Yeah, that stuff's great, but it comes at a cost. Young people are really stressed out, you know, checking their Facebook or Snapchat or Instagram, you know, right before going to bed, which gives them insomnia, or worrying about how they're perceived by other young people. It all increases, you know, mental health issues like depression or anxiety. And also, although young people are a lot more connected in many ways, they're also a lot more isolated in different ways. And the pressure to perform, to get the grades and things like that is more so than ever before, along with the fact that I think that there is less and less shame, particularly for males, about saying, yeah, I'm struggling, I'm having a tough time. So I think that's why we see more of these issues. But I think we need to recognise that, you know, 1 in 3 adults are currently experiencing depression or anxiety or PTSD symptoms. And, you know, stuff like Are You OK Day is great stuff. And that's what we need to do with young people. We need to create a culture and environment where they can talk about how they feel, they can ask for help, and they're not ashamed to say they're experiencing mental health issues and stress, things like that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions, guys? Okay, to finish off, I'll tell you something to make you laugh. My oldest grandkid, I've got 4 grandkids, the oldest one didn't name.
Slides that we didn't get to see.
That?
Too late.
Did you want to see her? No, she's flying in the other room. Yeah, so the last little story I want to tell you is nothing to do with teenagers, but my grandson, Harvey, who is 7, he's a bright little kid. He's a pocket rocket, you know, he's got tons of energy. The other day I was talking to my dear old mum on Skype. My mum is 88 years of age and she lives in England where I grew up. And I was talking to my mum on Sunday evening on Skype, and Harvey, who's 7, came into the room and he looked at the screen and he said, "Who's that?" Now, I've got to tell you here, my grandkids don't call me Phil or granddad or grandpop. They call me Elvis. Long story, but basically I was a musician and I didn't want to be granddad or pop, so my 4 grandkids call me Elvis, which is lovely. So Harvey comes into the room. He looks at the screen and he sees my mum, who is an 88-year-old silver-haired lady back in England. And Harvey said, "Who's that, Elvis?" And I said, "That's my mum, Harvey." And he looked at her and he said, "Your mum's the Queen of England." Queen of England. So this is great. Harvey has been going to school every day and telling all the kids at school and the teachers, Elvis's mum is the Queen of England. Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Yeah, yeah. And that makes me smile when I think about that. Yeah. All right, guys. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for the intelligent questions. I will make sure that I send these slides to Carleen so she can distribute to you guys. But have a wonderful mental health week, and look after each other and look after those young people.
Thank you.
Take it easy.